Apparently, we are surrounded by Nazis nowadays. It seems society has become so crazy that we all have to ask ourselves in good faith, am I a Nazi? For the past decade, we have seen many people on the left and the right call each other out as Nazis and their respective parties as the Nazi Party. But many of the people who are being called Nazis hold many different views. It appears that the people are being called Nazis just for having a different opinion. But that's not what the word Nazi means. So, what is the definition of Nazi? It is a contraction of two words, nationalist, socialist, which comes from the 20th century German group called the National Socialist Workers' Party. You know, that political party led by that one guy with an awkward choice of facial hair? Yeah, that one. Side note, Nazism is a form of fascism. We'll come around that point in a future project. For the past few years, I've heard many people on the left and the right call each other out as Nazis, and their respective parties as the Nazi Party. Let's examine the Nazi attributes and see if they apply to either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. Quick reminder, we must all be as gentle and respectful as possible as people hold their beliefs very intimately, and pointing out any flaws in their ideology can be a very painful experience. So let's try to be careful about this. Whenever a correction is to be made, we have to make sure that our default response is not mocking or insulting, but rather courteous, kind, and calm. There are a handful of attributes of Nazism. Today, we're going to look over the two fundamental aspects, nationalism and socialism. Let's start with socialism. Socialism is not free market capitalism. Neither is it full-blown Marxist communism. Socialism is much worse than either of them. You see, capitalism recognizes private property rights for individuals who aim towards entrepreneurship, innovation, division of labor, specialization, and economic freedom for future growth. Capitalism provides the greatest amount of liberty, even though it inevitably allows inequality. However, inequality in this case is a relative term. Yes, the wealth gap in the United States between the rich and the poor is very high, and so is the wealth gap between the poorest Americans and the poorest people in the world. Thus, inequality within capitalism is relative. Communism, on the other hand, envisions a utopia that is absent of private property rights, no social economic classes, no money, and a complete lack of government. The last two facts a lot of people seem to be unaware of. Communism promises the complete and total equitable economic security at the cost of individual liberty. However, communism ends up providing neither security nor freedom. Socialism has evolved into a mixed economy system, allowing a capitalist market economy that is planned and ruled by government intervention, including policies such as the redistribution of income, heavy regulation, and a public welfare system. Basically, socialism is when corporations are hijacked through rulings, regulations, and revolving door employment by the governing elite class. What does history show us? Nazi Germany supported many public work projects, government-led labor programs, and created political incentives for private corporations to benefit off the Nazi cause. Some people may argue that the German Nazi Party gave up many public services to private companies, but those people fail to realize that those deals went down solely because it was politically beneficial for the Nazi cause, not to advance private individual liberty, but to secure the power and control of the government over society. It was the Nazi government helping Nazi-sympathetic corporations to further the Nazi government's agenda. There was nothing truly politically free or private about Nazi Germany. Even though universal welfare was greatly discouraged in Nazi Germany, the Nazis were very supportive of public welfare programs that would mostly benefit racially pure Germans through Nazi institutions such as the Winter Relief of the German people. The Nazis believed that the German people should be granted financial support in Nazi Germany at the cost of other races. Nazis supported increased regulation of the private sector, creating an illusion that Germany supported a free market capitalist society. In truth, Nazis hated capitalism, instead favoring indirect government-controlled private institutions. Now, do Republicans support socialism? No. According to Pew Research Center, 84% of Republicans stand against socialism. Subsequently, the vast majority of Republicans support capitalism. Republicans are capitalists, not socialists. What about the Democrats? Do the Democrats support socialism? Yes. More than 65% of Democrats support socialism. There are more Democrats who support socialism than Democrats who support capitalism. Democrat controlled regions exhibit significantly more government control and regulations over the private sector than their Republican counterparts. This is why doing business in Democrat states is much harder than in Republican states. This is also one reason why the cost of living is much higher in Democrat states than in their Republican counterparts. When it comes to socialism, it is the Democrat Party that supports it. Time to move on to the next Nazi attribute: nationalism. Opening the dictionary or Googling the definition shows that nationalism is identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion of the interests of other nations. Practically, nationalism is when the Mexican government holds a Mexico First policy to serve the Mexican people. The Canadian government holds a Canada First policy to serve the Canadian people. The Ukrainian government holds a Ukraine First policy to serve the Ukrainian people. And the government of the United States of America holds an America First policy to serve the people of the United States of America. Basically, when the nation's government puts the nation first to serve the people of the nation. If that's the case, then who wouldn't support nationalism? You would want to support putting the people of your country above the people of other countries. Those people have their own governments and leaders. The nation's government should put its nation first to serve the people for whom it was set up to serve. That definition is not something people have a problem with. It's the historical political context that reveals how people distort nationalism under the lens of racial or sexual goals. According to Britannica, nationalism is an ideology based on the premise that the individual's loyalty and devotion to the nation-state surpass other individual or group interests. This basically means that if the government decides to favor a particular group over other groups within the nation, any individual who supports such a nation-state is a nationalist. The way nationalism was applied in Nazi Germany between 1920s and 1940s was not based off citizenship, such as the case of the Ukrainian government serving the nation's population, that being the Ukrainian people. No, rather it was based on a specific group of people within Germany, that being racially pure Germans. Nationalism within the context of general citizenry is good, but beyond that, it's bad. It's only when you start mixing in race, skin color, sex, gender, sexual orientation, ableism, classification over varying degrees of citizenry, such as being a native-born citizen or a naturalized immigrant. All these things mutate pure nationalist principles into an ugly monster. Nationalism in Nazi Germany was based on racial theories, believing some races should be held with more respect than others. German Nazis believed that the Jews were the worst scum and vermin that crawled upon the earth. The Middle Eastern and African people were viewed as better races that weren't as bad as the Jews, but they were still considered subhuman species. Next, you have Hispanic and Indian people, whom the Germans considered to be better than the Middle Eastern and African people, but still low-level humans. Then you have Slavic and Asian people, who were much better than the Hispanic and Indian people. And then you have white Europeans in general who were at the top level of the hierarchy. Finally, the German Aryans, who were the most superior race of the white Europeans and thus the supreme species above all the races of the world. That was the social racial hierarchy that the Nazi Party accepted, believed, and upheld within their society. Adolf Hitler and many of his cronies gave speeches and influenced medical publications and ordered officers to put up posters that claimed that white Germans were deserving of control and power because of their German whiteness. Hitler's racial statements in his rise to political office boiled down to him saying, "We had too many non-white, non-German people," in reference to the Jews, "hold powerful and influential positions that have affected Germany in a way I disagree with. I call upon you Germans to pay attention to me and to give your support to me, Adolf Hitler, because I am a white German man." Nazi German nationalism did not revolve around German citizenship, but based itself on identity politics. Nazi German nationalism used personal characteristics as means to influence people's lives. Nazis believed that the Jews were responsible for all the problems that Germans were experiencing after the Great War. The Nazis wanted the Jews to pay for their past misdeeds and to compensate the Germans for all the hardship they endured. Apparently, Germans weren't able to become successful without the Jewish people's money. They advocated to seize the property of the Jews and employed other means of sucking wealth from the Jewish community. Now it's time to look at our two American parties. What does the Republican Party base its nationalism on? The answer is legal residency, or at the very least, citizenship. Republicans, like all people in other countries, want secure borders, competent customs and border protection, and a fair immigration process towards legal status. Republicans are supportive of immigration as long as the immigrants follow the laws that U.S. citizens follow, such as respecting international borders. Democrats, on the other hand, base their nationalism on identity politics. Don't believe me? Just watch the 11 and a half hours that is the 2025 DNC party officer elections. Remember when I said Hitler's speeches incorporated identity politics as a means of influencing the election? Essentially boiling down to him saying, "Vote for me because I'm a white man." Well, most of the candidates of the Democrat National Convention literally did just that. A bunch of black people trying to convince voters to vote for them on the grounds that they are black.
Hello, Democrats. Hey, I am speaking, and I would love your attention. There is a black woman at this podium, and I deserve your attention like the 11 people who went before me. Yes, I am speaking. Democrats, let us not let Republicans claim the mantle of patriotism. Democrats are patriots too. Let me also thank the black women.
A bunch of women trying to convince voters to vote for them on the grounds that they are women.
Good evening, Democrats. Look up here. 3 strong black women standing before you. 3 black women who, rather than just grabbing a chair, ran for chair.
A proud non-binary Afro-Latino from the South Bronx.
If you are ready to get back to work, you are ready to have a hard fighter, then I'm asking you to take a chance on someone like me, a proud non-binary Afro-Latino from the South Bronx.
A proud non-binary Afro-Latino from the South Bronx trying to convince voters to vote for him on... Oh, wait, no, he's non-binary, so he would be them. No, non-binary, so they would be an it. Anyways, trying to convince voters to vote for it on the grounds that it is a non-binary Afro-Latino from the South Bronx. Watching Democratic conventions is like watching a circus full of clowns, except real clowns know that they are clowns. Hitler, in essence, said, "Vote for me because I'm a white, straight, male German." And most of the Democratic candidates literally said, "Vote for me because I'm black, gay, trans, immigrant, etc." Also, not only do Democrat candidates use their race and sex as reasons to be elected, Democrats also discriminate against races and sexes for different positions, such as the case when President Joe Biden in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary debate promised to pick a woman as vice president and to appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court.
Number one, I committed that if I'm elected president and have an opportunity to appoint someone to the courts, I'll appoint the first black woman to the courts. It's required that they have representation now. It's long overdue. Secondly, if I'm elected president, my cabinet, my administration will look like the country. And I commit that I will, in fact, I'll pick a woman to be vice president.
Imagine if Donald Trump said that he would only pick a man to be vice president and that he would only appoint a white man to the Supreme Court. How do you think society would react that some of the most important positions in the United States of America would be decided based on race and sex? Interesting. Democrats also seek out votes based on race. Take Joe Biden again. In an interview with Charlemagne the God on The Breakfast Club, Biden said, "If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black."
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Imagine Trump being interviewed and said, "If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Sleepy Joe Biden, then you ain't black." I'm pretty sure if Trump said that, everybody on the left and the right would call Trump a racist. Why don't they call out Joe Biden for his racism? Because he's a Democrat.
In this campaign, we've also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden, I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Oh, Joe Biden's own VP called him out as a racist. And the Democrats still elected him. Why? Probably because Democrats don't know what real racism looks like. Another interesting element of the Democrat Party is its insistence upon reparations, taking money from white people who apparently are to blame for all the problems that black Americans face today, and distributing it among black people, who supposedly can't become successful without white people's money. About half of the Democratic Party supports reparations, whereas more than 90% of Republicans reject this racist idea. Now, to be more accurate, Democrats supports the idea that descendants of slave owners, most of whom are white, should pay some form of penalty to the descendants of slaves, most of whom are black. Restitutions might have worked during the Reconstruction era, immediately after the American Civil War, but it's been too long to calculate fair restitution at this point. This poses a lot of statistical and ethical problems, the most obvious of which is the fact that the Democratic Party is wholly accepting of forcing children to pay for the sins of their fathers. Well, more like their great, 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 great grandfathers. Another obvious problem is what happens when a black person is a descendant of slave owners. Sunny Hostin, a well-off woman of color, found out that her ancestors were slave owners. You would think someone who advocated for something as foolish as reparations would realize how stupid it is when they discover that they themselves would be the ones to pay the price for a crime another person committed. But no, she still supports it. What if a person is a descendant of both slave and slave owner? Does such a person just pay themselves their own reparations? Also, since it was the Republican Party that fought to destroy the racist institution of slavery in the United States, would that mean that Republicans are immune to paying reparations since their predecessors fought to free the slaves? And wouldn't that mean that the Democrats who fought to protect their right to keep black slaves be the ones who owe black people reparations? Another idea that the Democrats allude to is allowing black people to not pay taxes. Never mind the fact that there were also white slaves, and Indian slaves, and Hispanic slaves, and Asian slaves. Never mind the fact that there were black slave owners. Yeah, history tells us that there were plenty of black people who owned slaves. Never mind the fact that today there are more poor white Americans than poor black Americans. Never mind the fact that culture plays a more significant role on economic success than past injustices, as evidenced by the case of Jamaican Americans, who are one of the most successful minority demographics in the United States in many aspects, such as having a higher median household income than the average American household. Never mind the fact that in 1942, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were sent to actual concentration camps in the United States by the Democratic Party led by Democrat President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who authorized this evil with his Executive Order 9066. The Democratic Party does absolutely nothing to fix the problems it causes. The Democrats keep talking about helping minorities, but never actually do anything for the many races of people it harms and destroys. But guess what? It was Republican President Ronald Reagan who signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, providing restitution payments of $20,000 to each of the 60,000 surviving Japanese American victims of the Democrat-run concentration camps. Now you might wonder, why didn't Abraham Lincoln, the Republican president who fought against slavery, provide freed slaves some form of relief? Well, Great Reconstruction was going to happen under Abraham Lincoln's leadership, such as working with states to provide freed slaves with rehabilitation and opportunities, until Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865 by John Wilkes Booth after hearing Lincoln's speech about his desire to grant voting rights to black Americans. John Wilkes Booth, a sympathizer of the Democrat Confederacy, was so furious over Lincoln freeing the slaves and close to giving them voting rights that he shot President Lincoln dead. Afterwards, Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, a very devoted Democrat on top of being a sympathizer of the racist Confederacy, became president and threw out the window all of Lincoln's plans that involved providing freed slaves restitution. It was the Democrats once more who prevented black Americans from receiving aid for the problems the Democrats were guilty of. Republicans were very close to giving freed black slaves restitution then, but the Democrats held back the Republicans again and again. It was the Republicans who were more supportive of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, Civil Rights Act of 1968, and Voting Rights Act amendments of 1970. The Republicans always championed equality for all, but it was the Democratic Party and Democrat leaders such as President Woodrow Wilson who promoted widespread racial segregation and opposed women's right to vote. Do Republicans support nationalism based on racial and sexual identity politics? No. Republicans support a unified nation of U.S. Americans on the basis of legal residency and U.S. citizenship. Most Republicans don't care about race or sex or where U.S. citizens were born. The Republicans' idea of the American nationality is based on legal residency and citizenship, rather than racial or sexual characteristics, making it more akin to patriotism. Do the Democrats support identity politics-based nationalism? Yes, very much so. Democrats subscribe to racist and sexist policies that also target people by sexual orientation and self-proclaimed identity. The social hierarchy of the Democrat Party is based upon group self-marginalization, self-perceived oppression, and outspoken victimhood. The more oppressed a person or group or conglomerate of groups are, the higher their evaluation on the Democrats' social hierarchy is. According to Democrats, white men aren't as valued as white women. White women aren't as valued as black men. Black men aren't as valued as black women. Black women aren't as valued as lesbian black women. Lesbian black women aren't as valued as trans lesbian black women. Trans lesbian black women aren't as valued as wheelchair-bound disabled trans lesbian black women. Wheelchair-bound disabled trans lesbian black women aren't as valued as wheelchair-bound disabled trans lesbian black women with autism. There are many more marginalized categories that we could add to that diarrhea of words, but you get the point. This is the Nazi-type identity politics of nationalism that the Democratic Party supports. Democrats are nationalists. Fun fact, most Democrats will acknowledge that Americans are living on stolen land, land that was stolen from the indigenous American tribes, even though those indigenous American tribes stole land from other indigenous American tribes. And looking into this further, those tribes had tribal wars over land all the time. There are still tribes today who are arguing over land rights with each other. These tribes still hold grudges against other tribes to this day. All the while, Democrats do absolutely nothing to return the stolen land. And to make the Democrats' case worse, the Democrats support mass immigration. As you can see, the Democrats care very deeply for indigenous Americans, but not as much as they care about mass immigration. Indigenous Americans are found lower on the Democratic Party's social hierarchy than the immigrants. We've gone over how the Republicans are patriotic capitalists, while the Democrats are nationalist socialists, or in other words, but there is a lot more to unpack, such as labor rights propaganda, anti-Semitism, as well as the many fascistic elements that the Democratic Party utilizes. I will cover those issues in the near future. If you're a conservative or a Republican, please do not be happy about what I said in this video. This is very sad news. An entire political party with tens of millions of Americans have fallen for the delusion that they are anti-Nazi, when in reality they meet the very attributes of what it means to be Nazi. Please be kind and patient with our American brothers and sisters. If you're a Democrat, please reflect on the information that you've received. Really consider your fundamental beliefs and ideas. I have many disagreements with the Republican Party, so this video is in no way in support of the Republicans. Neither is it a condemnation of Democrats. Even though I've shown how the Democrats meet the criteria of Nazi, I refuse to be one of those people who go around calling other people Nazis. I don't see how such behavior is beneficial in dialogue and society. I just hope that this information will help broaden your understanding of what it means to call someone a Nazi. Certain ideas, even with the best of intentions, can have horrible unintended consequences. Changing your views can be good, and sometimes change is morally necessary. Figure out what changes you need to make of yourself today so you can become a better version of yourself come tomorrow. Regardless of who you are, even if we were to disagree on most things, I wish you all the best with peace and prosperity.